Today, I have the great honor of speaking with Lori Cohen. She is the CEO of PACT. The organization PACT stands for Protect All Children from Trafficking. A very important conversation, a very important organization. Please listen to this podcast with Lori Cohen. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. Today is a very special episode. We're going to talk about a major disease which is affecting our society, and in particular, our meetings and event industry. We're going to talk about child trafficking. And I'm very honored that Lori Cohen, the CEO of PACT, Protecting All Children from Trafficking, is my guest today. Lori, thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, Eric, for hosting me. We're very excited to be here today.
Before we get into PACT and the change of name that people might know your organization as ECPAT in the past, tell us a little bit more about your journey. Who is Lori Cohen? What is your journey, and how did you get to be involved in what you're doing today?
Thank you. I think my journey explains a little bit about how many people have come in contact with this issue, in that when I started, I had no idea that I would be spending a career working to prevent human trafficking. I'm a lawyer by training. I knew that I wanted to use my legal skills to help people, but frankly, in law school, there were no classes about human trafficking. There was no discussion about human trafficking. I really didn't know anything about it for a number of years. And I found myself sort of midway through my career, I really wanted to do some public interest work. I wanted to give back to the community and really make good on the plans that I had had as a young law student. And I was working at a domestic violence center. I speak Spanish, and so I was asked to work with immigrant women who were domestic violence victims. And these were women who had been identified by the police as having been beaten by their partner. So it could be a husband or a boyfriend. And the court system had processed their case, but they needed some additional legal services. And so well into their experience, having already escaped their abuse and gone through the legal system, they were referred to me for some additional support. And what I found in interviewing them and trying to understand the circumstances of what happened, how did they get here? And not to say that there's ever an excuse for domestic violence or a justification, like, why did he beat you? But I really did want to understand what was going on. And what I found repeatedly was my clients were telling me, well, my boyfriend said that we had a debt and we needed to make money. So I had to have sex with other men for money. And if I didn't, he would beat me. Or my trafficker, not actually, I didn't say my trafficker, my boyfriend said he had arranged to have me smuggled here, and now I owed money to the smugglers. And if I didn't pay the smugglers, he was going to bring my little sister up and sell her to other men. Or one story that really stays with me is my boyfriend got me pregnant, but realized he couldn't make money selling me to other men if I had a big belly. And so he beat me in the stomach to try to force me to have a miscarriage because I wouldn't have an abortion. And, at the time I was a mother with young children, and that just haunted me. And I realized that this was domestic violence, but that there was something else going on. And in my office, we started saying domestic violence on steroids, that it was just another level of abuse. And what was interesting is that none of my clients ever said they were in prostitution. they didn't even realize this was a form of prostitution. They just knew that they were being made to do something that they really didn't want to be doing, that they had trusted the people who brought them here, who promised them a life, who promised them a home, who promised them love. And they were deceived and completely confused. And honestly, I was confused also. I didn't know what was going on. And,
Mm.
and I had an obligation to represent them as their lawyer. So I started researching what was happening, and why had the police not identified this? Why had the courts not identified this? When they'd gone to the hospital to get medical care for their injuries, why had none of the doctors or the nurses or the social workers asked any questions about, like, why were they so injured? How did this happen? What was the background? Like, nobody was asking these questions. And so once I started asking these questions, I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop. And I realized that I was trying to focus as a lawyer on helping them with their legal problems. And that was important. And it was necessary, but it was really not enough. And for them, actually, the legal piece was the least of it. They really needed medical care. They needed counseling. They needed a safe place to stay. They needed a job. They needed just support services so that they could recover from, just in some cases, years and years of horrific abuse. And so I started to become educated about trafficking, and then started to work within the legal center where I was at the time, putting together a program where we could provide a range of services, not just legal services, but counseling and job training and English language and education, trying
Mm.
to help them build a life. So it just became a passion, because it was not this remote theoretical issue. This was a person in my office who was wounded, who was crying, who didn't know where to go for help. And I just couldn't look away.
Mm. Mm. Well, tough, very tough stories. Then you join what was called at that time ECPAT.
It was ECPAT USA. And when I was representing clients, ECPAT USA was one of the sources where I turned to get information. At the time, there was very little material out there to educate the public, to explain what was trafficking. And ECPAT USA was one of the few organizations that really had high quality material that understood some of the issues that were creating opportunities to exploit people. And they broke it down in a way that I could really understand it. And I trusted the organization. So about 4 years ago, the founder of ECPAT USA was retiring, and they had put out a call to look for a new director. And I really felt indebted to this organization and so appreciative. And I also felt that because I had been representing victims at that point for over a dozen years, that I had a lot of firsthand, or really my clients had firsthand information about what it was, but maybe I had secondhand
Mm.
knowledge and secondary experience on understanding some of the challenges that my clients faced. And I felt that I could take that information and also bring in the experiences of my clients and of other survivors of trafficking into this policy space,
Mm.
and try to make a difference, try to create more support for this movement of preventing the exploitation from happening in the first place.
Wow. Just a tactical explanation now about the change from ECPAT USA to PACT. And by the way, and we'll repeat it at the end, but the website is wearepact.org.
That's correct. We are PACT, WEAREPACT.org. And my experience in joining ECPAT USA, I think, helped to inform me that a name change seemed appropriate. So I had a number of colleagues in the anti-trafficking field who, like me, knew about ECPAT USA's work and really respected ECPAT USA. ECPAT USA was the first organization in the United States to raise awareness about child sex trafficking and exploitation. It was founded over 30 years ago, and originally it was founded with the mission of looking at child sex trafficking in travel and tourism, and to say we see a crisis of tourists coming from, in many cases, from the United States, but also from Western Europe uh, and North America generally, to at the time was to Asia, and purchasing children for sex. And I looked at some of the early literature that was published at the time that ECPAT USA was formed. And the literature now is really quite astonishing. There were papers written about why this was acceptable, why it was actually good for local economies to have adults purchase children for sex in these countries, why Asian cultures were so much less inhibited, didn't have the same kind of hangups that we Western nations have about adults having sex with children. And it's actually quite racist and horrifying that this was being passed off as acceptable behavior, because really it was a justification for pedophilia.
Yeah.
And my predecessor, who is a visionary, Carol Smolenski, had been approached by an organization that was founded in Thailand called End Child Prostitution and Asian Tourism, which is where the original acronym for ECPAT comes from. And they were looking for partners in the US to say, look, we can do work in Thailand to try to educate the community about not selling your children for sex, or trying to work with local law enforcement to say that this needs to be criminalized. But the buyers are coming from your country. The buyers are creating the economic incentive. The buyers are what's causing this to be so profitable. And so we need partners in the United States to address the issue of demand. And I have to tell you, at the time, nobody wanted to do this work. Nobody wanted to talk about it. It's much easier to talk about this as this is some problem happening in Asia, rather than actually this is a problem that we in the US are creating with our economic investment and exploitation. And so I give my predecessor, Carol Smolenski, a huge amount of credit for really being a pioneer and going against the tide, because people just, it's so much easier to blame other cultures rather than look within. And she said, no, this starts here. And so she created an advocacy organization to support the work that was happening in Thailand. And it was ECPAT USA. And that's how we started. What's happened over time, and the reason I thought the name change was necessary, was that the ECPAT network, which now is quite a large network, stopped focusing only on Asian tourism. And the name changed. It took on another name, looking at ending child prostitution and child pornography. And since then, those terms have been disfavored because we don't talk about child prostitution anymore. It's trafficking. And prostitution makes it sound like these are adults who are making a choice. And the same with pornography, is looking at, adults making a decision that they want to produce sexually explicit images, and children, children can't consent to that, and it's a form of child abuse. So that second round of name change no longer is being used. And so we had a name that really didn't stand for anything anymore except our historical legacy of the early pioneering work. And so when I stepped into this role 4 years ago, my colleagues in the field knew ECPAT, but friends, families, supporters, the broader network said, well, what's an ECPAT? What does that stand for? What does that mean? And I would have to then go into this long explanation to say, well, actually, it doesn't stand for any of this right now. And I thought, all right, rather than explain what we no longer stand for, why don't we pick a name that actually reflects what we do stand for, that ties into our historical connection with the ECPAT network, and is also easy to pronounce, because I can tell this to you as a Floridian, that people kept calling us Epcot. And I said,
Oh my God.
we're not Epcot. We're really very different from Epcot.
Wow.
And so I just thought we need something that people can pronounce. And so we spent a long time really thinking about, who are we? What's our name? How do we stay connected to our core mission? And we realized protect all children from trafficking is exactly where we are. And it's making a pact. We're making a pact to protect children. We're making a pact to continue to engage awareness. We're making a pact with our community to say we're all in this together, to make sure that no child is ever again exploited for sex. And it just seemed to resonate, and the feedback generally has been positive. One thing I do want to mention with the name change is that I did speak with the ECPAT International Network, which is still, the leadership is still in Bangkok, Thailand, and let them know that by updating our name, we are still very much part of the ECPAT network. So the ECPAT network is active in over 100 countries. It has something over 120 member organizations globally. And we are extremely active participants in this network, because this is a local issue, it's a national issue, it's a global issue. And we are really delighted to be the US representative within the ECPAT network.
Wonderful. Thank you for this explanation. You mentioned that obviously there's an indication of the parents in the Asian countries, and then that your work was to basically educate people here. And being Belgian, remember organizing incentive trip all over the world. That is something that I heard, of course, as well about in Europe. Now, the last years, and I don't know exactly how many years, I actually was made aware that it's a huge problem, not only in Asia, it's a huge problem in America. And I just want to give two shout outs to David Peckinpah from Merit and Mike Dominguez from Alhai for creating awareness, at least as far as I'm concerned, but I know they're very involved in creating awareness in our industry. But could you speak a little bit about what's going on in America and why everybody in the meetings and event industry should be aware of it and should have their eyes open?
Thank you for that question. I'm really I'm smiling, because speaking about both the work that Dave and Mike have done in these fields is so wonderful, and it's exciting, of best practices and where we want to go as an organization, and also within the travel and tourism industries. So you're right. And the first round of our name change, when we said, look, we're not focusing on Asian tourism any longer, was in part recognizing that this is not purely an Asian issue, that this is happening here within the United States. Now, it's present everywhere globally, but within the US, we prefer to really think of this as an overseas problem. We don't really want to think about this happening within our boundaries. And at the time, ECPAT USA, now PACT, realized that we needed to focus on best practices within the US. So we started reaching out to partners in travel and tourism and travel management and to event planning, and saying, look, we really need to do something at home, and let's talk about trafficking as it's happening within the United States, within the hospitality fields, and how can we address this in a way that will create a safer environment. I have to say that initially, when Carol and the founding staff at ECPAT USA started this work, there was a lot of resistance. There are many reasons why it's easier to talk about what's happening in Asia, because if you talk about what's happening here in the US, then we have some level of responsibility. We have to address this. And there were, frankly, many businesses that did not want to acknowledge this was happening in their industry because they didn't want guests in hotels to think that trafficking might be happening on their premises. They didn't want to think that meetings that were being organized in cities might be seen as a magnet for traffickers to bring underage victims to those locations. And there was some real resistance to this because then you needed to do something about it. You needed to stop it. And that was a lot of responsibility. And I have to say that both Dave and Mike are visionaries who really got it. That you can, let me see if I can get this phrase right, do good by doing well. Is that it? Where you're doing both. That what's really the right thing to do is also good for the bottom line. And that rather than to say, all right, we're going to engage in trafficking awareness, we're going to train our staff, we're going to make sure that this is not happening on our properties, that this is not happening in events that we organize, that our staff is aware and that they can take action if they see something suspicious. And we will not only support them, but we will applaud them for being proactive, was a way to create a safer environment and also to make sure that the brand was being protected. And so I think they are rare individuals who understood that, who believed it, and ultimately who really are driven by the idea that they want to do the right thing. They want to make sure that no child is ever exploited. So it's been wonderful to work with both of them because I was interviewed about the value of leadership and what is the role of leadership, and our work at PACT involves a tremendous amount of private sector engagement. And what I have seen in these 4 years is that the companies that are most enthusiastic about doing this, that are most successful about doing this, that really are embracing education as necessary and good for their teams, are those companies where we're getting support from the top. And the top are saying, you have to do this. This is really important. And it makes a huge difference within the organization. And I have to say, both Dave and Mike have just consistently been clear about this. And it's very exciting to partner with them on this work.
So two things I'd like to share with you. The first one, I am not surprised at all that when you mention leadership, the name of David Peckinpah and Mike Dominguez are coming up. I have tremendous respect for them. I'm not surprised at all. The second thing that I'm extremely surprised is that you had so much pushback. I mean, we're talking about children. I don't care what adults do with each other, but we're talking about children that cannot defend themselves. How on earth could this be a problem? How could people even think that, oh my goodness, my bottom line might be affected, and I don't even know why, but how could people we're talking about moral clarity a lot since October 7 and what happened in Israel. I mean, how could people be so afraid of defending children, of exposing a situation? How could that be bad for a brand? I don't get it.
I haven't met anyone, even though I read those terrible articles from the 70s, sort of praising pedophilia. I haven't met anyone who said to me, I think trafficking of children is a good thing, or I don't think it's a problem, or I don't think it's morally abhorrent. I think in the anti-trafficking space, there are debates about certain topics, but nobody is debating that children should not be raped. And because that's what we're talking about. Children can't consent. And so then it's rape.
Correct.
So I do know, and some businesses don't really want to say this directly to me because I'm the CEO, but I'll get the back story in some cases. And I'll see that there's discomfort with talking about this topic. So I'm actually really grateful that you are sharing this, because I know that many of your listeners are part of the hospitality industry. And I want them to understand, I want them to realize that I get where that reluctance is coming from. It's not that I think they're bad people. It's not that I don't think they don't care about this issue. I get that it is an uncomfortable topic. But even if you're uncomfortable discussing this, there should be, from a business perspective, a business understanding that it is really in the best interest of the business to get ahead of this, that you want to be the hotel that implements training that is available for free for all employees. PACT has on our website free training for hotel staff. We have free training for travel management and events planning staff to look at what is trafficking and how do you identify it and what are safe ways to report it, right? You want to be known as the brand that actually does that. You don't want to be known as the brand that turned a blind eye to trafficking when the police raid your premises and it turns out that the red flags there were all over the place. And now you're in the press for reasons that you don't want to be. So I feel like it's better it's an uncomfortable subject. We don't want to indicate that any one hotel, any one company is facilitating trafficking. What we want to do is create partnerships so that hotels can protect children and that at the same time they're protecting their brand. So we don't see this as inconsistent in any way. And I'm working on a research project right now, not in hotel or travel management, but in a related field. And I'm still seeing a lot of research that indicates why businesses don't want to address this. They don't want to be known as the brand that traffickers are drawn to. And so we're trying to work with different brands to develop messaging that's saying, look, trafficking can happen anywhere. It can happen in very high-end properties. It can happen in very low-budget properties. We have a survivors council, and the survivors on my survivors council, they've been trafficked everywhere. I mean, in places that one might not normally associate with what we would see in the movies. It's happening everywhere. I had a member on my survivors council who were walking around, and she basically said, yeah, any of these places, I could have been sold in any of these places, and no time flat. No, it's so easy, you have no idea. So, we want to try to help all brands and all models just really engage in prevention.
Talking about prevention, I like to share a story first, and then ask you to share what anybody can do right now after listening to this podcast. There's action they can be taking. Mike Dominguez sent an email. I had the honor of being one of their external consultant for Alhai, and he sent an email talking about what the work you're doing and giving some links to follow an online training. And I did those two. I remember on Sunday afternoon, I went online and did that. And there, I learned about some of the signs, which are the obvious signs, if you know about them, that could be an indication of trafficking. And also remember, it says, don't intervene, don't go yourself, let people know. And I was with my family in New York a year ago in December, and I was checking out of an hotel, and I saw next to me a lady arriving and actually checking in, and didn't want to give her credit card for the check-in, and wanted to pay cash. And again, it says in the training that might be an indication. It doesn't necessarily mean it is, but immediately I happen to know the general manager of the hotel. So I get in touch with that person, and I said, please have a look at your camera. I'm checking out. There's a person next to me. This is what happened. And that could be a sign. I don't know if it is, but Again, see something, say something. But before seeing something and saying something, you have to be aware of what are the signs. So what can anybody's listening now could do afterwards, and what is the type of online training that you can follow, as you say, for free?
Thanks. So I'm so grateful that you said something, because so many people are afraid to say something, but you potentially saved that woman's life. Now there may be a reason why she wanted to use cash, but it's certainly one of the big red flags that we look for, particularly in the hotel industry, because why is there this reluctance to use a credit card to hold incidentals, right? That it's sort of it should raise a question. So as you mentioned, PACT hosts on our website actually now 3 free online trainings. So we are in partnership with the American Hotel and Lodging Association and Marriott to offer a training, both a 30-minute training and a 60-minute training on identifying and preventing human trafficking. The 30-minute training actually has been approved for use in many of the states that now require hotel staff to take a training. And it's either available for smaller hotels that just have a limited number of staff and they don't have a lot of resources. It's very easy to log on and do the 30-minute training, and they can click and print out a certificate showing that they completed the training. The training is also available, both the 30-minute and 60-minute training is available for a free sublicense. So we will happily send to any company, and it does not need to be a member of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. It's really any company at all. Could be a mom and pop bed and breakfast. It could be any place. And actually, it doesn't even have to be in the US. We've gotten requests from other countries. And we can send them the training so that they can host the material on their own learning management system. And that has proved to be extremely popular. So we launched this tool. We knew that there was interest in the industry to get more training, but that this is an industry where profit margins can be tight, and so we wanted to make sure that this was a readily available tool. So it's available for free. We launched it in what turned out to be a really interesting time, February of 2020. So right before the pandemic really took hold of this country and brought a lot of damage to the travel and tourism industry. And it was very interesting to see what happened. So a number of companies sort of put the information on hold, but then others said, well, this is a free tool. Why not have our staff do the training? Business is quiet. And it really took off. And we had a lot of interest. And I think in March, we had 4 brands that signed on of 2020. And then now I think we have something like 55 companies are using it. And this summer, we hit a really important milestone. We had over 1 million members of the hotel industry completed training. So not just accessed it, the access number is much higher. But it's really been quite extraordinary in the industry to provide this kind of information. And I think it's a testament to the leaders of the hotel industry to say, like, we do need to address this issue. We have a third training for travel management. So for event planners, convention centers, organizations that are hosting significant events that will bring in conference participants. And that's also available for free on our website. And that was as a result of support by Carlson. And we're very fortunate in having private sector partners that believe in this work and want to make sure that it's not just that one company has an edge over the other in this issue. This is a case where everybody is competing to be the best. And they're supporting each other to be the best. And that's been a really fun part of this work, that there is a lot of support within the industry to try to make sure that everybody is doing the best work possible to make sure children are safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find this training? Is it at wearepact.org?
Wearepact.org. There's a link. There's a resources link that says for professionals. And if you go to the drop-down link, it offers the hotel training, either the 30-minute or 60-minute module. If you want to get really in the weeds, the 60-minute module, what some of the feedback we got was the 30-minute module, which is the one that's approved by the states right now. The feedback we got was, this is great, but we want more. And so we created a more detailed version that provides a lot of information about what to do with virtual check-in, what are reservation patterns that might be suspicious. And then managers, both trainings say, look, if you're hotel staff and you see something suspicious, notify your management. And the managers were saying, well, we need a separate training. Like, we need to know, you're telling all our staff are coming to us and saying, what do we do? So what do we do? And so the 60-minute training actually has an add-on for management. And so it gives guidance for managers on what are safe steps. And one of the things I want to go back to with your question, and I'm glad you highlighted this, is engaging in identification. What do you do? So, as I mentioned, I've been working on a research project in a related industry, and we did a survey. We looked at, how do you respond when you see trafficking? And somebody wrote in the anonymous survey, like, I'm going to punch the guy's lights out. And we thought, okay, actually, you don't want to do that.
Honestly, that would be my first reaction if I hadn't followed the training.
That's a normal emotional reaction. I mean, how do you not want to, jump in and sort of deal with someone who is abusing children in this very horrific way? So I get that emotional response. And what we want to do is walk people away from that, because it's really dangerous. And these are criminals. And I mean, I always thought of the people who trafficked my clients as cowards. And, they were choosing like the most vulnerable people they could to bully them. And one of the things that for me was very exciting was to give my clients the tools to then go after their traffickers. And it was really rewarding, because we worked very closely with law enforcement to make sure that these disgusting people ended up behind bars for many years, and kind of shifted the power balance. But in that moment, you can't go and beat the guy up. So one of the important messages of the training is, don't intervene. You should take note of the information. You should report it. It could be to report it to make a 911 call. In the training, we really emphasize also the value of calling the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And there's a toll-free number, 888-373-7888. So it was created as a number that might be easy to remember. And
let's say that again. 888.
So the easiest way to remember it is 888 and then 3737-888. So if you don't think about it the way we normally think about phone numbers, if it's 3737-888. And the hotline now has created other ways to contact them, including having a QR code that can be scanned, a texting link, but also reporting it to 911 will put you in touch with local police. If something is happening on a hotel premises, certainly a good idea to call the police so that they can come and investigate. The challenge is that if we as civilians get involved without the right training to intervene, we could end up getting killed. Some of these traffickers are armed. Many of them are dangerous. There might be other people with them who we don't see that might be guarding or watching what's going on. You don't know who's there. And then it puts the victim at huge risk. So one of the things we realize is that victims often, we want to think of them as powerless, but they really have very good judgment in some cases where they need to be able to decide when is it safe for them to escape. And we shouldn't be stepping in and deciding that for them, because really it can put their lives at risk. So most of the clients who I worked with were not, we like to talk about rescues. Most of them weren't rescued. They escaped on their own, and they had to choose the right time when they knew that they could get away.
Are you informed of all those results you're getting? Can you track the number of?
We do. We track. So one of the things we're very excited about, the way we've set it up, both on our website and through the free sub-licenses, is that we're able to track the data. We're able to track on our website how many people are logging in, how many people are completing it. We put in anti-cheat protocols, so you can't skip ahead. You can't get the certificate until you complete it. So, all the things that people get annoyed about, but we're making sure that people really are getting the training. And then we're also implementing pre and post training surveys to see how much knowledge people are getting. And it's showing that it's effective. People actually are learning. And it's an important tool, because unfortunately there are a lot of misconceptions about trafficking. There are a lot of myths about trafficking, and that misinformation can cause us to look for indicators that really don't exist. So if there were a bee in my bonnet, it's, those images of somebody being tied up or handcuffed, and someone who's trafficked, you're never going to see them tied up. You're never going to see them, no one's ever going to walk into a hotel who's a trafficking victim who's tied up, right? They're not going to check in looking like that. So if you're looking for that, then you're going to miss the trafficking victim. But if you're looking for the person who wants to only pay cash, if you're looking for the person who requests that their room be located at an exit so that people can leave without going through the lobby, if you're looking for the person who doesn't have luggage and maybe has a few possessions in a plastic bag, if you're looking for a person who is what we say dressed weather inappropriate clothing, right? So don't have sufficient outerwear when it's cold weather. They're just a range of things that we can look for. If you're looking for reservation patterns where you're insisting that everybody has to be in a row of adjoining rooms so that people's entrances and exits can be monitored easily, we can start to collect a number of indicators where any one factor is not necessarily an indicator the person's being trafficked. But when you get two factors, when you get three factors, you say, okay, this needs to be looked into. We really need to pay attention. Yeah. And your advice, look at the video camera, is great. Go back and look at the recorded information. Hotels have access to a lot of this information, and it can be done discreetly. So you're just keeping an eye on what's happening.
Totally. And also, you have testimonials, or can you track the number of I don't know how you call it, intervention that had happened? Do you work also with the law enforcement? Are they informing you of that?
So it's very interesting. We have been trying to get testimonials. There's some testimonials that are out there that have gotten a lot of publicity. What I think is interesting is that brands are still reluctant to disclose when they have discovered trafficking. So we know that it's happening, But for the same reasons that companies were reluctant initially to do anything, now they're actually taking the training, they're taking the steps necessary, but they still don't necessarily want to be identified as the hotel, the convention center site, the meeting location where trafficking was identified and disrupted. And I think it's because nobody wants to be the first one to step into this. There's a fear that if they step up, they're going to be seen as the only one. This is the only place where it's happening. So we're trying to think of creative ways to raise awareness about this and say, look, we want to celebrate you because we know it's happening everywhere. I can walk down the street in New York City. I can point to hotel after hotel where I know exactly which of my former clients were trafficked in which hotels. Like it goes up and down the spectrum. But it's really a challenge still to get brands to come forward, and it's not limited to the hotel industry. We see this in multiple industries. Nobody wants to be known as that brand where this happened. So I hope, as a result of this podcast interview, some hotel manager will reach out to me and say, celebrate my staff, celebrate my team. We did a good job, and we want to be recognized because we'll throw a huge party for you. We'll really elevate. We'll share the love.
How can they get in touch with you?
So they can reach me. My direct email is L, first initial, last name, Cohen, at wearepact.org. If that's hard, they can just write to info@wearepact.org. And I would love to talk to anyone in the industry who really wants to celebrate their team, because we all need to be doing this. And these are heroes. These people are heroes. We want to think of heroes as like, going in and doing the physical rescue, but they are heroes in that they're doing it in a way that makes sure the victim comes out alive.
Wonderful. Laurie, I wouldn't want to end this conversation without talking about a map that you show me before we start recording. And it's you're going to tell me exactly which is organization that has put this map together. But bottom line is Florida, where I live, is one of the most dangerous place when it comes to human trafficking, child trafficking. Can you explain a little bit that and what is happening and who put that map together? And most importantly, what we can do to fight that?
Absolutely. So the map is created by a national anti-trafficking organization called Polaris. So Polaris is the North Star. And so they use the name to sort of indicate like the journey towards freedom and safety. Polaris runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So that's the hotline that I mentioned previously, 888-3737, 888. And they log calls from individuals who want to report trafficking. And last year, I'm sorry, I just looked at their data. They published their data for 2021. That year, they recorded around 51,000 calls to the hotline. Calls or texts reporting trafficking. A little over a quarter of those calls were from victims themselves who were seeking services, information, exit plans. And the remainder of the calls are from Good Samaritans, from people in a range of private industries, from schools. Educators are really important, from healthcare. The healthcare industry is quite important in this area. And so Polaris created a heat map where they recorded where all these calls were identifying trafficking. And so if you look at people can just type in Polaris trafficking, and the organization will come up, or the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and they can put in map, and the map will come up with a map of the United States. And you'll see, as I showed you, Florida is bright red from the southernmost point all the way up to the northern border. It is just completely red. And it's the first time I saw that, I actually was surprised, because I had this notion that it was really limited to Miami, and it's not, it's throughout the whole state. So I think what's interesting about Florida is that you have significant amounts of sex trafficking, which is both domestic and international. So there are a number of cities in the United States that are hubs for both domestic and international trafficking. We talk a lot about sex trafficking as unfortunately it gets mingled up with smuggling, and smuggling is very different from trafficking, and lots of migrants are smuggled across the border without being trafficked. Trafficking is really a really small percentage of who's smuggled in. And most of the trafficking actually is happening already in the United States with US citizens. And Florida has both. You have international trafficking, people being brought in from overseas, and you have domestic trafficking. You have US citizens who have never left the state who are being trafficked. And that's one of the important things to raise, why Florida is so red in terms of the color of the heat map for trafficking. The other thing on Florida that's important to note is that there's both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So we've been talking mostly about sex trafficking today, but labor trafficking is a real phenomenon. And Florida does have a significant amount of labor trafficking that's happening across multiple industries.
But that's not included in the map that you mentioned to me, or is it included as well?
It's both. It's both.
Okay. Well, not to diminish the first one, but okay. Wow. It's I had no idea, actually. When you show me that, I was like, wow. So how can we end with a little positive note? What is there anything positive that you see that you want to share, that things are improving somehow?
I feel very hopeful about this issue, that it's very exciting to see PACT's partnerships with the private sector really taking root, and that we do have, as we mentioned before, fantastic leadership in this field who are our biggest champions. And I think when PACT started now, 34 years ago, it was very lonely. There were no other organizations in this space. The government really had not yet discussed trafficking. Actually, the sort of landmark trafficking legislation in the United States wasn't passed until 2000. So it was more than a decade before we were out there. And it was seen as something, this is just like a bunch of maybe some faith-based organizations and nonprofit organizations were doing. But that work was really important, and it was essential to laying the groundwork. But now that private industry has said it's actually really important that we take a role in preventing this from happening, that the government has passed legislation. It's actually now a crime to travel abroad and purchase a child for sex. And ECPAT USA's initial work, we played a critical role in getting legislation passed. And it's unusual because normally you can't be charged for crimes that are committed overseas. But we argued, along with other anti-trafficking groups, that the planning was taking place here. The planning to engage in this illegal activity was taking place here. And that was enough to say, look, you can't do this. You can't be a US citizen and travel abroad to rape children. It's just, we're not going to permit it. So it's exciting to see that there has been movement in this field, and excitement and passion for it. Passion. I mean, we were all children, and now I'm meeting leaders in the field who not only remember their childhood, but are parents themselves, and say, I can't imagine a world where this could happen to my child. And I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone's child. And it's that hanging on to that kind of vision and that passion, I think is really going to move the needle. So it's a tough topic. It's a difficult topic. It makes people uncomfortable, but we want to take that discomfort and say, all right, let's do something about it so that this becomes a non-issue.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for your time. I see why PACT is so lucky to have you as their CEO. Thank you for everything you're doing. Once again, it's We Are PACT. So WEAREPACT.org. If anyone wants to have more information. Laurie, thank you very much. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you one day with David Peckinpah or Mac Dominguez.
That's wonderful. I'm excited. Yes, looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Laurie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And more importantly, thank you for all the work that you and PACT are doing to protect all children. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please do so on LinkedIn. And if you've learned anything, please do share this episode with your network. Thank you. Bye-bye.